Welcome to a very special live episode of The Kicker. We're here at Jimmy's Corner in Times Square, which since 1971 has been a hangout for journalists from the New York Times, Condé Nast, Hearst, Time Life, many other publications. And we are so thrilled to be here with a special episode pegged to CJR's recent issue about access. And so my guest today is Melody Mercado. She's a reporter at Block Club Chicago, covering downtown and the West Loop, and she covers a lot of politics in that job. So we want to talk about access and what it means for local reporters. Melody, welcome to The Kicker.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's set things up a little bit. I want to hear a little bit about you first. How did you get to Block Club? What is Block Club for people who don't know?
So I started off as a television journalist in Des Moines, Iowa. I covered the 2020 Iowa caucuses, and then I decided I wanted to switch over to print. So I worked for 2 years at the Des Moines Register, covering city government there. And then in 2022, I was very excited to come back home to Chicago as the downtown reporter for Block Club. And for those who are not familiar with Block Club, we are a nonprofit newsroom that prioritizes hyperlocal coverage of Chicago's neighborhoods. So instead of traditional beats like business, politics, food, all the reporters have neighborhoods. And that way we can really dedicate coverage to Chicago's neighborhoods the way that they deserve and need to be covered. We know that neighborhoods on the south and west sides and on the north sides all experience different issues, and so it's important to cover them as so. And so I've been in my position for 4 years now. I cover downtown and the West Loop. A lot of that is business, politics, development, and restaurants.
Cool. And yeah, Block Club was one of the original of before this more recent wave of nonprofit local startups. Block Club was there early on. So tell me a little more about that sort of neighborhood ethos and how covering citywide politics fits into that.
Yeah, so we cover city politics very differently from the traditional media outlets of the city. We don't have a traditional city hall press corps. Really, all of the reporters there cover their local aldermen depending on the neighborhoods that they cover. Since I cover downtown and the West Loop, I really kind of focused my coverage on 4 very specific aldermen in the city. And the same is said with everybody else. And so, when it comes to citywide coverage on politics in Chicago, a lot of that is a team effort because a lot of my colleagues that cover different neighborhoods will have direct access to those aldermen that I might not have since I don't cover those areas. And so because of that, we're able to look at some more hyperlocal issues. We get to examine policy on a more of a hyperlocal level and how it affects individual communities, groups, whole neighborhoods. And so it's a little different and I would say a little bit more expansive than some of the other media outlets in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the mayoral politics in Chicago? I think a lot of people outside Chicago remember when Lori Lightfoot was the mayor during a lot of the pandemic. Then Brandon Johnson was elected. Yeah, set the stage for folks who don't really know what's going on in Chicago politics.
So Chicago politics is a sitcom. It's a drama. It's it's drama. I will say that. People that follow Chicago politics take it very seriously because and have fun with it because Chicago politics for the longest time was rooted in what's called the machine. And machine politics during the Daley administration was everybody in city council voted with the mayor. If you scratch your back, I'll scratch yours. If you donate to my campaign, I'll make sure that you get elected. And because of that, Chicago politics is very complicated. And so after Mayor Rahm Emanuel announced that he was not going to run anymore for re-election, it really set the stage for somebody hopefully new and separated from the machine to take over and have someone that was really more independent in office. And so when Mary Lori Lightfoot was elected, she still had ties to the machine, but she was still considered an underdog in the election. A lot of people think about Lori Lightfoot and a lot of her decisions that she made during the COVID era. She was very popular during that time. She kind of had some very interesting viral clips during the pandemic where she was encouraging people to stay home. So people might have remember her dressing up as like Lysol wipes, which was hilarious and really solidified her in like the meme culture of Chicago politics, in Chicago in general. But she was notoriously very difficult to work with, and she had a very combative relationship with the press. And so when she lost her reelection campaign, didn't make it into the runoffs, Brandon Johnson again emerged as an underdog, and not only an underdog, someone that was considered no ties to the political machine, and someone that was considered very, very like a very independent political figure from past individuals that were in the mayor's office. So very, very interesting. And people, and myself included, would consider him like the most progressive mayor we've had since Harold Washington, which was Chicago's first black mayor.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about his progressivism a little bit, because you were quoted at length in this CJR article about local reporters having trouble getting access to local officials. And the subheadline of that article was like about how people are taking their cues from Donald Trump. Brandon Johnson is not taking his cues from Donald Trump, right?
Absolutely not.
He is as progressive as big city mayors get. So can you sort of like explain what the political change has been with him coming into office?
Yeah, with every new mayor that comes into the office, there's always this idea that that individual is going to be more transparent and more collaborative than the previous administration. This happened under Lori Lightfoot as well, and that turned out to just not be true. When Brandon Johnson was elected, he was very friendly with the press. He was very friendly in giving interviews. Of course, he was in election campaign mode. When he got into office, things definitely changed. I think most of that is because it was he was still getting his staff together, and so there were a lot of positions related to communications that were not filled, whether that be a PIO for a various city department, or even getting his core mayoral office communications team together. And so because of that, the waterfall effect was just that he was just not accessible as he was from when he was running for election. I don't think that's unique to Chicago, but it was unique in this particular situation, because I think when people saw Brandon Johnson coming into the fifth floor, they said, oh, he's going to be super transparent. He's going to be very collaborative. He comes from a very big progressive background. And so this is going to be like the most transparent mayor we've had ever. And that just wasn't the case.
Mm-hmm. So when and how did you see that starting to change?
I think when you are so used to being able to get access to someone, especially during election season, you start to see that slowly change as, you know, that person now steps into office, and then you tell yourself, okay, they're just getting their team together. They just need a little bit of time. And then we're 6 months in, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm looking at my emails. I have never gotten a response for anything I've been trying to reach out for. The city was going through a lot during that time. We were still going through the migrant crisis with other Republican-led states just dropping off migrants in the middle of the city, and the city really struggling to figure out how to take care of all of these people. But still, it just felt like, all right, we're 6 months in. Why are we all having issues getting a response for literally anything? And the Chicago Press Corps is close. We all talk. We're very friendly. I love them very much. They're great to work with. And I was like, hey, did you reach out on XYZ? They're like, yeah. I was like, did you get a response? They're like, no. And I was like, oh, me neither. And we just started to realize that this was something that was very common within the administration, and it was just super frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were mentioning that it wasn't just the mayor's office. Like, if you needed to get somebody from the building's office, there wasn't even necessarily a PIO in that job. Like, can you explain a little more about like the big picture of what was going on and what it meant for like you doing your job?
Yes, of course. So one thing that we were starting to realize is that the public information officer position for various departments were just unfilled. There was nobody there to answer media requests. Some of those departments, if I'm remembering correctly, included the Department of Buildings, which was a department I would reach out to often, and the Chicago Department of Family Services, which was huge during that time because they were the point of contact during the migrant crisis. And so we just started to realize that they didn't have PIOs. And so the mayor's office strategy was to then funnel all those media requests for departments that didn't have PIOs. Okay, this person in the mayor's comms team answers for these 4 departments, this one for the other 4, this one for these 4. And it created a bottleneck for responses because I was like, you know what, to be honest, I don't think this mayoral comms person is going to know the answer to the nitty gritty question that I want to know about, like, why to the Department of Buildings about why a bar was shut down, right, or like why were these building permits approved or not approved? And even more importantly, you know, it was very difficult to get answers on, hey, what's the strategy we have migrants that are sleeping on the streets and a lot of them with young children, and what's the strategy to get these women and children off the streets and into some housing? And so just across the board, it just was very messy. And that kind of carried over into FOIA requests as well, because some of those PIO officers were also acting as FOIA officers. So not only were they needing to handle media requests, they were also having to be the point person for FOIA, which sounds like a nightmare because I know what my FOIAs are asking for. And I was like, I would never want to be the person having to answer Melody's questions on Department of Buildings and then have to go over and manually go through and redact all these FOIA requests that she wants.
Right. Yeah. And how big of a change was that part of it from other mayors, city halls that you had covered in Chicago and elsewhere?
I only covered the Lightfoot administration, or helped to cover it, for maybe about a year before Johnson took office. You know, I was still decently able to get an answer on things, but they still were not the best. My thing is, if I'm going to send you a question, can you please at least acknowledge that you've received my email? With the Lightfoot administration, sometimes I wasn't going to get an answer, and I was told I wasn't going to get an answer, but at least there was some sort of communication back and forth. With the Johnson administration, I would just send something into the wind and just like pray that I would get something back, and I just wouldn't.
Mm-hmm. And what, if anything, was Johnson saying about why he wasn't being more responsive to media?
I think his attitude at the time was, and it's important to understand that Johnson comes from an organizing background. He's very much in the community, talking to people, wanting to understand issues. I think his attitude towards this issue that he was having with the press corps was, I'm accessible to the people that need me, and that's the people. I'm going to the churches, I'm going to the community events, and I'm talking to people. But from the press side of things, it's like, okay, those people are very fortunate to be able to have direct access to the mayor of the city of Chicago. We also represent other groups, neighborhoods, individuals that also have questions that aren't as fortunate to be able to be at the church that you're going to be at, or at the community event that you are going to pop in and talk to some folks and shake some hands. So that was the ongoing conversation with that particularly.
Mm-hmm. Are there particular stories that you remember from, that 2023, 2024 era where you sort of needed something from City Hall that you just weren't able to get?
It's a good question, because I feel like it was so long ago, even though it wasn't, right? I think that particularly just the migrant crisis in general was really difficult. I did a story with my colleague Mick Dumpke about the city, how they were paying over market rate to rent from very nice buildings in the West Loop to house migrants. We went back and forth with the city so many times. We had to file a lot of FOIAs. It was so much time on the phone trying to even get to somebody in the Department of Buildings because, again, they didn't have a PIO. And so having to work with the mayor's office and then also having to communicate, these are the particular things that I'm looking at, and this is what that means, because somebody in the mayor's office who's really great at comms for, the mayor is not going to be the best and know all the nitty-gritty stuff, as I said, about buildings. So, I say that story probably took twice as long for us to get it together because it was just, we don't want to be wrong and we don't want to then have to issue a retraction of any kind. But also at the same time, like, at the end of the day, we're doing our due diligence to at least say, hey, our story says XYZ. Is that accurate? Or, trying to make sure that we're explaining the process that you're going through when you're looking to lease buildings to house migrants. And so that was a story that immediately comes to mind that was very frustrating to get through.
This was a common theme in the article in the access issue, is that when there's a crisis and you really need response, and then they're not there to give response, then you have real problems as a reporter, right? Because it is hard to know information is moving so fast. Do I even have the right information? There are a couple of reporters from Texas quoted in the same piece that you're quoted in saying, like, after the horrific flooding there last summer, they couldn't get in touch to ask basic questions about what was happening. So that's an interesting parallel to me with the migrant crisis. And then also, you need like day-to-day stuff, right? Like you're talking about getting information about building permits, what have you. So how did that change like kind of the fundamentals of how you were doing your job?
I think this is where publications like, personally, in my humble opinion, that Block Club shine, because the way we do our coverage is we also prioritize the individuals that are living in the neighborhood and that are working with the community organizers or maybe a community organizer themselves. And so where the city really failed in a lot of their media strategy, we were able to backfill that with all the different sources that we had that were already out in the community. At some point in time, sometimes we were just saying, can you at least tell us if this is factually accurate? Because we have XYZ sources that are saying this, and can you just confirm? And so Block Club strategy has always been, yes, covering city, what's happening at City Hall is important. What the politicians are doing are important, but even more important is what's happening out in the community. And so that is just an example of how we were able to still be able to do our job because we have so many great connections that we talk to on a daily basis.
What were your communications like with sources, at the community level, who presumably in some cases wanted answers from City Hall as well? And I assume there were situations in which you were sort of like, well, I can't really get those. I think in those cases, it just strengthened some of those relationships because, those individuals also want to know what's going on. They also want to be connected. And so sometimes it did help to get a call from someone who's saying, I'm hearing XYZ. What have you heard? And that oftentimes is the jumping off point for a story at Block Club Chicago. Is somebody sends us a tip, somebody DMs us, someone from the neighborhood community organization that I see at all the meetings calls me and because they had a meeting with, maybe someone at a high up organization that's wanting to do something in Chicago, but they don't know anything beyond that meeting. So, I think if anything, it strengthened those relationships, but it definitely was frustrating because especially during the migrant crisis, everybody had questions. And sometimes
it was hard to be like, I don't know the answer, and I'm really sorry, but I'll try my best. We're all trying our best.
Yeah. So then in late 2024, a year and a half ago now, Johnson fires his press secretary, and he specifically expressed regret, saying, I should have been more accountable to the media, and I'm going to make that change now. Tell me about the firing of the press secretary. What was going on there?
Yeah. So press secretary Ronnie Reese, he was followed over from the campaign, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. And in my experience, he was the bottleneck for a lot of the issues that I was having personally, trying to get in touch with the mayor's office about issues. He was obviously fired. There was a big investigation that came out about harassment, about making people feel uncomfortable, about inappropriate comments he was making in the workplace. And although, you know, none of the that's all what happened with city employees. He also wasn't really doing a good job as a press secretary. I know he was seeing my emails. I know he was seeing my text messages. And when an example is when the mayor took the stage at Lollapalooza before Billie Eilish performed to welcome everybody in Chicago, I tweeted something about, I was covering Lala. I tweeted something about the mayor being at the music festival because everybody was like, who is that? And I was like, it's the mayor of Chicago. But of course, these are all 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds. They're just wondering, why can't we just watch Billie Eilish? Who is this man on the screen? And so I tweeted about that exchange because it was so funny and maybe I felt a little bit old. But he texted me about it. And I was like, oh, so you are reading my timeline, but you can't answer my media requests. And another time he texted, he's a big sneakerhead. I also tend to wear cool sneakers as well, you know. Not just for the guys, but he texted me about my shoes that I wore to the press conference. And I was like, man, you are tweeting me about, you're not tweeting, texting me about my shoes, but I can't get a text back about something important or like my media request. And so, yeah, that was just a very interesting tidbit of what Ronnie Reese was like.
What did you respond when he texted you about your shoes?
I just said thank you, and he's like, where can I get some? And I was like, all right. It was very short.
Answer my question.
It was very short, and the communication was very, long periods of time between those text messages. So it was hard. It was, never knew when you were going to get a random text from Ronnie Reese, but of course I couldn't really ever get him to respond to any of my questions.
So after Reese gets fired, how quickly was there a new press secretary in, and what, if anything, changed after that?
Mm-hmm. It was a pretty quick turnover. The person that was elevated to his role was already working with the administration. She, I think that they knew that they needed a hard reset. Everybody at that point, every outlet was complaining about how difficult it was to get in contact with the mayor's office or to get a response. And they were also, talking about, at one point, somebody in the press corps on their Twitter was saying X days since Johnson talked to the media, and it was high. I don't remember the exact number, but it was high. And at that point, I think they knew that they needed to do a hard reset there. And so his team, led by Aaron Connolly, who's wonderful at responding to media requests, I will say, started hosting weekly press availability, which was huge because a lot of the times, and they're held in the beginning of the week, and the mayor shows up and he just takes questions. And that was really big because everybody's working on stories and everybody has questions. And the first one that he did, it was so long because you could tell like everybody was just like, oh, we don't know when we're going to get you again. We have to ask all of our questions at one time. And so he still holds a standing press briefing, and he does a press briefing after every city council meeting, which is, city council meets about once a month. So that has also been helpful as well. Mm-hmm. I will typically now get a phone call if I am going to get something back or not, which is nice, because at least I know that you're working on my request. Or it also gives me, I prefer phone calls because it also gives me the opportunity to ask you a follow-up as well. Mm-hmm. So that is something that has changed too. And that was like night and day. The standing press availability, I think, it changed the workload for a lot of people because it made it easier to get their stories and meet their deadlines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And are there PIOs now in the various departments that you can go to when you have the nitty-gritty question?
Yes and no. I think PIOs ebb and flow. I think during the beginning of the Johnson administration, obviously he was setting up his team. And so I think that influx was due to that. We are now 3 years in. And so I typically can get a PIO to respond, and so can my colleagues. And if I can't, then still, the mayor's office is still a point of contact to be like, okay, who can I reach out to about this? Mm-hmm. And usually they're helpful there as well.
Mm-hmm. When Johnson does have press conferences, one of his party lines that has sort of like flowed out that even I heard about before I read this article was questions have to be on topic. And so if you come to a press conference and you're asking something other than what the press conference is ostensibly about, he might not answer that question still. Can you tell me a little bit about what that looks like in practice?
Yeah, so that's very frustrating for a lot of people for obvious reasons. One of the instances that comes to mind is, I cover downtown, so he was doing a press conference along the Chicago River, and I obviously get sent to that. But wherever the mayor is going to have a press conference, everybody from the core City Hall press corps is typically going to be there. They're working on stories during the week. This is their time to get questions to the mayor. And it's very frustrating when then the mayor just only wants to answer questions on the Chicago River swim, which, no offense, nobody has questions about that because it happened last year and we already know how it works. And so we have questions about everything else that's happening in the city. And so one of my friends and colleagues at the Chicago Tribune, she's amazing, Alice Yen, wanted to ask a question. At the time, there was a woman that was said to be held at O'Hare, I believe, in immigration custody. And she asked the mayor a question about that. And he just looks out into the crowd like he didn't even hear it and was like, anybody else have questions? And that made me really upset because Alice is a very hard worker. She gets things done. She's a fantastic reporter. And everybody else in the crowd was laughing at her. And they're like, yeah, we're here about the Chicago River swim. And they're making comments and like, oh, why can't you take direction? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, we're not here to ask the mayor a question on a subject that he wants to be asked about. I was like, he should answer the question. And I ended up tweeting about that because in my opinion, and a lot of other press corps, people from the press corps, that was pretty ridiculous. And so that took off online. And the mayor's office responded to, not directly to my tweet, but had tweeted about what had happened and said, it is standard practice to ask, for on-topic questions. And I'm sorry, but it's not. If the mayor of Chicago is at a press conference and you're taking questions, I'm going to ask him whatever question that I need for my story because you're a public official and you're accessible right now. This is not new. And, Lightfoot would try to do this during her press conferences as well. And we would answer, and at least she would respond, maybe not answer the question but at least she was responding and not pretending that reporter just didn't ask anything or wasn't there.
Right. One of the reasons I was really excited to talk to you in particular is because I think a lot of people assume okay, Republicans don't like talking to the media because Donald Trump is very anti-media. The Republican Party right now is just sort of anti-media as a brand.
Yeah.
That is less true of progressives. And in a situation like this, Brandon Johnson is not has no interest in defending ICE, right? So if ICE is holding a woman at O'Hare, presumably he's upset about that. And there is a version of events in which Brandon Johnson takes that as an opportunity to have a bully pulpit and say, I don't yet know what's true. That story turned out not to be true, right?
Correct.
There wasn't a woman being held. But, blah, blah, blah. Now I can go on my rant about ICE. What do you think is behind him not taking those opportunities to even push his own politics?
I don't know, because I think a lot of individuals in the press corps were asking themselves the same thing. Some of the questions related to immigration enforcement or related to migrant coverage or related to things that I would consider be a slam dunk for the administration to take the time to, even if they don't answer the question, to just go over their stance on the particular topic. That's what I would do if I was a politician.
Yeah.
But you just didn't do that. And I just thought that was so, I don't know. I think we were all just, it seems like a golden opportunity to be able to just get your message out there, even if you don't directly answer the question. But yeah, I don't really know what's behind that.
Huh. So Brandon Johnson is 3 years into his term, means there's another election coming not that far from now.
Right.
Tell me about what the landscape is looking like there and what, the early stages of covering that for media has been considering these challenges.
Johnson has been doing, already did his third year interview. He's been good at giving one-on-ones to most everyone who asks, typically around a yearly anniversary, which has also been good. We are just starting to see people announce just this week. Comptroller Susana Mendoza announced that she's running for mayor. She's, I believe, the first person to really go out there and be like, okay, here's my big press conference. I want to take Brandon Johnson's job. But we know that there are other players in the field that are waiting it out. They've fundraised a lot of money, and you don't need that money unless you're running for something big. And so we're kind of waiting to see how the landscape is going to unfold. But I think that it's going to be difficult for the mayor during his re-election campaign, because him and city council have not been working together very well. Just this year, city council bypassed his own budget and passed their own. And so because of that tension and just the way the scales are weighted right now, it's been difficult for him to get a lot of policy initiatives across the finish line. And so I think because of that, the everyday person that doesn't pay attention to Chicago politics is gonna ask, okay, well, what did Brandon Johnson accomplish? And he has accomplished some things, but he does have a very long list of things that unfortunately he hasn't been able to get across the finish line, because he has a city council that a majority of them are somewhat unwilling to work with him. So I think it will be a very dramatic, messy re-election season. And I think it'll be interesting to see if he can get reelected, because Mayor Lori Lightfoot had one term. And, that was the first time in a very long time that we've just had a one-term mayor. And I know that Brandon Johnson doesn't want to be known as a one-term mayor. So we'll have to see.
I have one more question for you, and then I want to give the audience a chance to ask a couple of questions. If you had a friend, a relative, something who was a politician, and you were sort of like making the case for, no, here's why you need to talk to the media, not from your role as a journalist for like, here's why I want you to talk to me, but like why it's good for politicians from their perspective to talk to journalists, what would you say to that person?
I think that social media only gets people so far. You can have 1 million followers on whatever platform. It's very popular for politicians to get their message across that way. But how many of those people are actual voters? How many of those people are actually registered? How many of those people actually live in the city of Chicago or the area that you are actively a politician in? And a lot of those people possibly aren't watching your stuff or reading your press releases. And it's important to talk to the media, one, to make sure that they're getting whatever policy initiative you're working on across correctly. And also just to make sure that, to continue to get your name out there. It's never good whenever you see a line that says XYZ did not respond to questions, or the line of after this published XYZ. That's never a good look. And so I think it's, the press is we're not malicious. I can only speak for myself. I am not malicious. But my point in reaching out to you as a politician is so that people can better understand, depending on the story that I'm doing, maybe you as a public official, as a politician, but also your stances, the legislation that you have gotten passed or are trying to get passed. And in my opinion, you just can't do that without a healthy relationship with the press, and also being able to take the hits as well. You're not going to like everything that I publish. And I have said that to many people. And I think some politicians take the hits well and some don't. And the way that you come across when a story comes out that maybe you might not like is going to, people are going to remember that. And so that's important as well.
Okay, any politicians who are listening to this was an excellent manifesto. You should listen to Melody. Let's see what questions everybody else has.
I'm Emily. I'm a researcher and a writer, and you've made a really strong case for clarity of intention and open lines of communication between reporters and politicians. Can you talk about what that looks like between reporters and readers of Block Club Chicago? I'd love to know. I mean, it's very clear to me that by showing how you're gathering information, you are painting a transparent picture of some of the reporting processes that often can feel opaque to audiences. And I wonder if you could just talk more about even common questions that you get from readers.
Yeah. Because of Block Club's neighborhood model, most of us also have newsletters as well. And so people love when they have a reporter that covers their specific neighborhood, even the politicians, I've been told. So they love that direct access. And many times I'll get an email from someone who wants to know, how did I come across a story, or how did we find, data or whatever. We always directly email or call those people if they leave a number. One thing that our investigative team does, or called The Watch, that I really love is they sometimes after a big investigation, they'll also publish how did they come up with the story and like how did it come to be. And I think that's also really important, because a lot of people don't know that some of the stories that we do at Block Club, the investigative team, takes a very long time. And it's important for people to know how we gather information, how did we get interested in this topic. And I think it helps people become more invested in us as a local newsroom. And I think that it also helps people, feel closer to us as reporters as well, because I never want journalism to come across as an elitist field. I signed up to do homework for the rest of my life. That's how I see it. And it's my job to, in doing that homework, then share it with you.
Hi, I'm Betsy from CJR. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the work you're doing. I have sort of like a lot of questions for you, but I'll try to keep it. Okay, first of all, you didn't talk about this in this conversation, but am I remembering correctly that Mayor Johnson like actively ran away from the press at one point? And can you talk about that for a second?
Yes. This was during the time where Johnson wasn't holding media availability. And so if you wanted to get him, you would have to try to catch him at one of the events that he was at. Even if they said B-roll only, press were going, because, you know, especially the television press corps in Chicago, they will go after you, because, you know, they got to meet their deadlines and hit their live shots. But there was an arrest of individual who killed an off-duty police officer in Chicago. And so that was the news of the day. And they couldn't get the mayor. So they showed up at an event that he was at. And you can see in the video that's online, you have, I think it was 2 or 3 members of the television press corps who are literally running after him and saying, Mayor, like, can we talk to you? Can we get your reaction on, and I can't remember his name, but on the arrest. And he's going. And the mayor's office said he was not running away from the press. He wanted to make sure that the car didn't leave without him, or like he was just making sure. And I was like, he's the mayor of the city of Chicago. The SUV is not going to leave without him, although he was the last person to get in the car, if you see from the video. But that was not a great look. It's also unclear if the mayor could hear them as well, but I mean, you could probably see them. So that was that whole situation. I think that was also a wake-up call as well, because that was not a great look either.
Yeah, and like, I guess this is sort of picking up off something that Megan asked you about, but so we are here in New York. We also have a progressive mayor. And something that we at CJR have observed is that our mayor spends a lot of time speaking directly to audiences via certain social media personalities, news influencers, people who are not professional reporters as such. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious if there are any parallels in your experience in Chicago, and how that may or may not reflect a sort of general shift in the relationship that, regardless of party, public officials have with mm-hmm. how they want to communicate with their audiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I'll take a wider lens approach to answering that question, because 2024 the DNC was held in Chicago, so I was lucky enough to cover it. It was in the arena. The DNC set up a platform, an area for influencers, and my seat was in the nosebleeds. And I was like, what's happening here? I couldn't even get a stable Wi-Fi connection to file my story, because, you know, other layers to that as well is that, understandably, there were different studio spaces that you had to rent out. They set up a tent. It was like a big whole thing. We're a nonprofit newsroom. We don't have $1 bajillion to set up space and have a private Wi-Fi connection. All that costs money, but we wanted to cover the DNC because it's important to Chicagoans, and so here I am in the stands trying to follow my story. Barack Obama was just on the stage, and I can see like the stage thing that they set up for influencers. They have like a frontline view, and I'm like, Obama's this big, and they can literally see him so close from where they're standing. And that the access that was given to those influencers versus even just like the local press of Chicago, I thought it's just a standout moment because we know that everyone's consuming news on different platforms, but they're consuming news from people that aren't even reporters. And some people prefer to go that route, obviously, because then they can highlight their specific message. But it just makes my job harder because now I'm going to events and I have to compete with somebody that doesn't know anything about about maybe the delegation that's there in the crowd. And I'm like, I really want to talk to Alderman Walter Burnett and he's all the way down there and I can't get to him. I have to switch out passes with someone, but this person that has 1 million followers that will just say whatever you want can just like walk around like nothing. And that is really frustrating.
Melody, thank you for doing this. It was such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. This is really fun.
Thank you all for listening. The Kicker is a production of the Columbia Journalism Review. Thank you so much to the CJR staff, Editor-in-Chief Betsy Moraes, and the rest of the staff. Thank you to Adam Glenn, the owner of Jimmy's Corner, for having us in this legendary establishment. Thank you to our amazing crew, Mark Van Hare, Fernando Firmino, and Alex Ham. Thank you to Susie Banakaram for all her support today. And once again, thank you all for listening. We'll be back with you soon.